and we have a special guest in studio with us right now. It is Brandon Huffman, the national recruiting editor for 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports. And hey, thanks for stopping by. How you doing on this day? Yeah, let me. You know what? The college football landscape. You've been doing this for a long time, so you've seen the change. You've seen where it was and where it is now, and where you think it might be going. To what Dion just said, and the firing of all these coaches, and the instant gratification of college football, how do you feel about the new transfer portal and NIL and everything else that's hitting college football?
I mean, it's changed the game. I mean, you see a guy like Chris Signetti who comes in with a program that's had no success for any historic period,
Yes.
and they go to the playoffs. And then this year they may be even better. We saw when Lincoln Riley went from Oklahoma to USC. They won 4 games the year before. The next year, they were 11-3, had the Heisman Trophy winner, had a chance to make the playoffs. You can get healthy very quickly because of the portal. So it's no longer allowing coaches 3 to 5 years to build the program, to clean the underbelly, and then get the program where they're at. Now, with the portal, if you get hired in November, you better have a great roster by December, and that team better be competing by September.
Wow.
When you look at the portal, teams like Colorado that go from 1-11 to, I guess, 2 years later being an 8-9 win team, but then not really having the chance to develop by way of the high school recruiting and just the overall program development. Is there a balance that needs to be struck? And what are you seeing as it relates to that balance, and who's doing that well right now?
I mean, Indiana, they seem to be the only one that's doing it well. And then what you're seeing schools that are getting healthy quick, but they're still not competing for the national championships without that elite high school program that we're recruiting from. If you look at the last couple of national championships, Ohio State, yes, everybody talked about the cost of their roster last year because they get a Will Howard in. But people forget that in Quinshon Judkins, but they forget that Jeremiah Smith was a high school recruit. Emeka Egbuka was a high school recruit. Everybody on that front seven on that defense was a high school recruit. JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer. They developed the year before when Michigan and Washington played. Yes, Michael Penix was a transfer. The rest of that team, Roma Dunze, Jalen McMillan, all high school recruits. Michigan, all high school recruits. So you can get very quickly healthy, but to sustain that when you've got to develop from within. And that's what Georgia's been doing. That's why they're as good as they are. Alabama is still doing that. And so there is a balance. We saw what happened with Florida State when they went from 2023, a team that should have been in the playoffs, to 2024, where they fell off a cliff because they relied so heavily on backfilling out of the portal. And if you make a few bad portal decisions, your program will suffer. And now as a head coach, you went from being the guy that signed this fat extension after the 23 season to now having your athletic director put a statement out middle of the year saying, we're going to keep monitoring to see what he's going to do the rest of the year. But Mike Norvell is in a bad way now because they miscalculated on the portal because they relied so heavily on it.
Do you think, how much has this changed high school recruit? How much has it changed the whole high school game right now with everything going on?
I would say 90 to 95% of a recruiting class is done by June, going into a senior year. There's no such thing as a senior year evaluation anymore. It's rare if there is. Braylon Hodge over at Cherry Creek is one of the few guys in the state who committed to Michigan State back in June, had a great start to his senior year, then Texas offered, Michigan offered, Oregon. He ended up flipping to Oregon. But guys like that are few and far between. You look at the quarterback that was committed to Boise State, Traden Bessinger. He's the second quarterback committed to Boise State that decommitted. Well, he's having a great senior year, and now he's getting the Power 4 offers, but those are rare anymore. These coaches want to move on. They want to have their recruiting class done by the time they go on vacation in July. So when they get back in August, they're just focusing on their season. And so if you don't have a spot, if you're a senior and you haven't committed by June or July, you better be an elite top 5 player in the country because coaches aren't waiting for you anymore. They're moving on to the next class. They're moving on to their season. And so it's really expedited the calendar to make your commitment much sooner.
Relationship building with the job that you've been doing for 23 years has been critical for both the high school athletes, the parents. And we have a lot of parents that listen to the morning sprint of high school athletes or prospective future recruits. What advice would you give them with regards to how to navigate this as a high school aged student athlete? If maybe you're not getting those big time offers, what are what are you telling people that are finding themselves without maybe the options that they thought they would have?
Well, for those that had options early on and those seemingly dried up, it's now a case of you've got to make that decision much quicker. There's no longer the ability to wait it out for other options to come because those other options are likely not going to come. If you are a parent that your son is not getting that attention, it's time to start recalibrating your expectations. Mm-hmm. The dream of playing for the big-time Power 4 school, whether it's the in-state school, it's a national school, that's dwindling. Now you go play maybe at an FCS school, a Division II school. Maybe you have to go the D3 or NAIA route. But you're going to have to recalibrate that expectation much quicker. And the reality is FCS schools are recruiting better than they ever had. They're not able to hold on to these guys. They're essentially becoming the minor leagues for these schools by getting these kids film for these first 2 years, then allowing them to transfer up. But now those FCS schools that you may have turned your nose up, those aren't even options. So now those D2 schools, D3 schools, if the goal is to keep playing football as long as you want, then stop just aiming for the big-time schools that you've got to be a genetic freak to be able to go to. You've got to look at every potential program, whether it's a D2, D3, NAIA, as a place to just go bet on yourself. And if you're really good there, then maybe you can consider moving up in a couple of years.
So one of the great things about being in the state of Colorado is the RMAC.
Yes.
Division II, they do offer scholarship money. Great programs just down the road like CSU Pueblo and Colorado School of Mines, Western Colorado. These are really good programs that NFL players have come from these programs. And so with this new world of minor league, if you will, are those places good opportunities for you to potentially build some tape and build a resume and potentially work your way up this crazy world?
No question. I mean, I saw a player at Central Washington 2 years ago, ended up down in the SEC. Central Washington's a D2 program. Like you said, you've got, Colorado School of Mines makes it to the national championship game. CSU Pueblo has won a national championship. So not only are you going to be competitive, you're going to have a chance to move yourself up. And I know those coaches don't want to hear, but I think these coaches now realize that's the reality of the situation. Jason Eck, who's now the head coach at New Mexico, when he was at Idaho, had one of the best outlooks on this I'd seen. When he was recruiting players, he said, listen, come to Idaho, just give me 2 years. If you do what we think you're capable of for 2 years, you're going to have opportunities to move up. But that also means that's going to benefit our program. And Idaho goes to the playoffs his first 2 years. He turns into the New Mexico job. Now he's a candidate for a lot of other named jobs. But he recognized these kids aren't coming to Moscow, Idaho for 4 years. If I can get 2 years out of them, they'll move up. We're seeing, Trinidad Chambliss was a Division II player. All right, Ferris State's one of the best teams in Division II. In fact, I think they're the ones that beat Colorado School of Mines. Now he's a starter at an SEC school at Ole Miss, who is a potential playoff team this year. So if you go to those schools, you're going to play really high-level football. And I think that there's this misconception it's not high-level football. D2 football, you watch those playoff games on television, that is some dang good football.
Very good football.
And those players, like you said, they're going to the NFL. So I think people need to become much more accepting of all options because in this day and age, essentially D2, D3 is almost what old school JUCO football was in terms of go there for 2 years, bet on yourself, and move up.
Great conversation that we're joined in studio here, national recruiting editor for 247 Sports and CBS Sportsline.com, and that's Brandon Huffman. My other question here, that as it relates to the state of collegiate football in Colorado, what have you noticed? Unbiased, not pandering to any crowds. What have you noticed both from the University of Colorado and maybe right now what they're doing in recruiting, and then also CSU and just overall state of those two programs?
Yeah, I will say that CSU is one of the most aggressive programs when it comes to recruiting players, not just the state, but also regionally. You'll see that Colorado State was the first offer for a lot of guys that end up going Power 4, whether that's for the local kid, whether that's for the kids out west. Colorado has not really emphasized high school recruiting, not just in the state of Colorado, but really nationally. And Deion's made no kind of bones about it. He wants to do the portal. He wants to go heavy on it. And sure, it worked when you get Shadur and Travis Hunter. You're not going to get a Shadur or Travis Hunter every year. So you're going to have to still have a base of recruits. And whether that's in-state recruits or regional recruits, you still need to recruit the high schoolers. And that's where I think that Jay Norvell really had a good idea. It was, let's go after these guys. Yeah, we're in the Mountain West. We may not get them, but we may have those relationships built that will outlast. T.I. Umukai, who's the number one defensive player in the state or number one defensive lineman in the state, he took an official visit to Colorado State before he ultimately chose Washington. Those relationships matter. And you see this a lot of coaches that are at Mountain West schools, and now Colorado State's going to the Pac-12. You're recruiting them to you, not necessarily to the university. So, when they commit to you, if you go to a bigger school, they're likely to follow you. And I mean, you had firsthand experience of that, Mike. And that's where so many coaches at Colorado State have realized, I'm not just recruiting him here to the school, I'm recruiting him to me. If I'm here, they come here. If I go elsewhere, they go elsewhere. But I think you're seeing a lot of other states really appreciate the in-state talent. The Power 4 schools from out of state appreciate the in-state talent maybe more than Colorado is.
With the legacy schools, like the big dogs, is there still a draw to those teams in the NIL world? And I mentioned this just because, like, who's the next Texas Tech? Where all of a sudden they're just like, we got all the money and we're here to spend it.
BYU.
Oh, is it?
BYU,
really?
And they started with basketball when they got AJ DeBansta, who's the number one player in the country. This year, they got the number one player in the state of California, a 5-star quarterback who chose BYU, Rider Lions, over Oregon, over USC, where his brother plays, over Ole Miss, Michigan and Ohio State were both pushing for him, and BYU is very deep-pocketed. And the thing with BYU is that they're now winning more recruiting battles in state. That was one thing that Kyle Whittingham was doing when he was at Utah, or he's still there, but when they were in the Pac-12, when BYU was an independent, Utah was winning every in-state battle. Well, now BYU and Utah are in the same conference. BYU is getting those players to stay in state, and they've got the financial resources to continue winning those battles in state, but then they're winning the battles outside of the state. So I think BYU, and again, if you're a Colorado fan, if you're another Big 12 fan, you don't want to hear that there's another school that can match Texas Tech. Nobody's going to have the oil money that Cody Campbell has, but BYU's got the resources to do so.
Last one here before we hit a break. Brandon Huffman, again, of CBS Sports and editor, national recruiting editor for 247 Sports. JuJu Lewis, is he or isn't he a Colorado Buffalo in 2026?
I mean, it's hard to think that he is. It's hard to think that he is. He's going to have opportunities, whether it's going back down to the South. He's going to have opportunities. And honestly, the best thing that's happening to him is that he's not putting out a lot of film right now to maybe show some warts. I look at a case like Dante Moore. You know, yes, he was able to revert back to Oregon where he was committed before he flipped to UCLA, but you see a lot of quarterbacks. Jaden Rashada, he started a couple games at Arizona State. He got to go to Georgia the next year. Now, he just can't stay out of the portal, but you're almost better off not having exposure.
Bad
if you're
film.
exactly where you're being exposed. You still want people to think, well, this guy was really talented in high school. He just didn't get a chance. And that's going to make your options that much greater. So I'd be kind of surprised if he is, because quarterbacks out of the portal are still kind of the crown jewel of what a program is looking for. We got the receivers, we got the linemen. We need a dynamic quarterback. He could be the guy.
Fascinating. Well, that's Brandon Huffman. Thanks for stopping by and give us a little bit of your time. We appreciate it.